We are recording the interview of Dennis Geehan. This interview is being conducted by Erica Carter from the Wright State University's Veterans Voices Project. This interview is being recorded at Wright State University in the New Media Incubator. It is 4:18 p.m. on October 23rd, 2018. How are you today?
I'm fine, thank you.
Thank you. When and where were you born?
I was born in St. Paul, Minnesota, May 29th, 1952. I was born about 6.5 weeks early, about the youngest baby at that time, too. So.
Okay. Who were your parents and what were their occupations?
My father, Elmer Geehan, was a United States Marine. Originally, he was injured in a concussion blast in boot camp, and they discharged him, and then he went and joined the Air Force. This is around the Korean War era. And he became one of the first OSI agents, like the NCIS for the Air Force. My mother, who was a nursing student, met him at the University of Cincinnati, and they married, and they had me about 7 months later, 6 weeks premature.
Okay. Do you have any siblings?
My mother's name is Maureen Geehan, Doris Maureen Geehan.
Okay.
Sorry.
Do you have any siblings?
I had 6. A brother just died a few weeks ago. I have 4 sisters, had 2 brothers. I'm the oldest.
Did any of them serve also?
The brother who just died was the other member of the family, besides my father and I, that was in the service. He was in the United States Army. He was stationed in Germany a couple years after I came back from Vietnam.
Okay. I'm so sorry for your loss. What were you doing before you entered the service?
Well, I was a military brat, so I had a very interesting life in that my first school and my first people that I grew up with were all Filipinos. We were living in Pasay City outside Manila in the Philippines. I went to a Jesuit-run Philippine military academy that runs from grade school through college, Ateneo de Manila. All my friends, everybody in school, were all brown kids. We came back for a couple years to Washington, so my dad took some more training and some more language. We went back to the Philippines, and when I was about 11, we returned from the Philippines, where I was one of only 2 white kids in school, both American kids, me and Brian Foley. And we came to a tiny little town in 1964 and 65 where I couldn't drink water with the Filipino kids, I couldn't eat with the Filipino kids, I couldn't play with the Filipino kids when we were off base. It was a tiny little town called Selma, Alabama. And my father, as the OSI agent in charge of the detachment, was the chief federal law enforcement officer in Selma because there was no FBI site there. And we had the experience that my father, who was assigned to go into the first march, basically to investigate the marchers who were suspected of being communists and possible threats to the base. That's just how the FBI and the federal government looked at King and the marchers back then. I mean, there were those who believed that it was truly about civil rights, human rights. There were some that thought there were communist connections. But during that march, that first march, when it broke out with the sheriff coming down on them with cavalry and batons and tear gas, one of the marchers, a black man, was being beaten by several men, and my father ran up to stop it, pulled out his badge, realized nobody would know what the OSI was, so he flashed his badge and yelled FBI. He saved that man's life. We believe that man was John Lewis, congressman now. After Bloody Sunday, my father convened a meeting of the sheriff, Jim Clark, who, by the way, in later years was busted for selling marijuana. Jim Clark and a couple of the organizers of the march met in our married officers' quarters in Craig Air Force Base, and we 7 Geehan children went out and were like wondering what's going on. And my father was basically telling the sheriff that you will allow the march to proceed or we'll declare martial law and seize the assets of the sheriff's department. So my father had a very key role in the successful second march, and we're really proud of him for that. From there we went to Virginia, Langley, and then we had the misfortune, I suppose, the sacrifice we ultimately made was to go to high school in Hawaii. Everybody's got to do something that's tough. My sacrifice was to go to high school in Hawaii. So I'd grown up in the tropics, never lived anywhere really north of the Mason-Dixon line after I was born in Minnesota. And for all of our relatives lived in St. Paul, Minneapolis, so I thought I'd go to school at the University of Minnesota, which had a good journalism school. And that was my intention, was to major in journalism. I had only visited the farm, the Geehan family farm, and relatives, usually during the summers when we were traveling cross country between assignments, and had no idea what winter was like. And so my first winter was a real winter was a Minnesota winter. And about 4 months in, I had gained 60 pounds. I looked out one morning, looked at a 2-mile walk to my first 8 o'clock in the morning journalism class and saw like 6 feet of snow. I heard on TV it was a 63 below zero wind chill. And I went back to bed, pulled the covers over my head, and I just dreamt that that bridge was going to collapse and I'd freeze in the Mississippi. Interestingly, 30 years later, that bridge did collapse and took like 18 cars down with it. When I woke up, I walked 2 blocks to the Army recruiter and I said, I want to go into the Army and please send me to Vietnam. And he said, you know, the draft ended like a few months ago, you don't have to do this. And I said, listen, if there's a just God, send me to Vietnam. I'd much rather face a North Vietnamese division than another day of a Minnesota winter. And that is how I ended up going into the Army.
How old were you?
I was, let's see, I would have been 18. Yeah.
Now, just to back up and clarify a little bit, you did all 4 years of high school in Hawaii?
No, I did 2 years in Virginia. My dad was assigned to Langley Air Force Base. And then I spent my last 2 years at Radford High School in Honolulu, Hawaii.
How old were you when the second march and the first march?
I was, let's see, it would have been 64 and 65, so I would have been 12 or 13. I'm trying to remember exactly when it was. If it was, I think the march was in 65, so I would have been 13.
Okay.
We went to the only integrated school in Selma, which was the Catholic school Our Lady of Assumption. And I was in the 8th grade then, and my brothers and sisters filled most of the other classes. We remember riding the buses through the demonstrations, rocks being thrown at the bus. I don't remember which side was throwing the rocks. I also remember one of the most fantastic things was we were Catholic, and going to our Sunday school, and we had these comic books they would hand out. And I remember this one issue, and I was reading it, and it was all about a president that was dealing with the whole issue of the race, civil rights and human rights and stuff. And you never really see this president, and you just see him kind of in the shadows or off to the side. And when you finally get to the very last page, this president who's been dealing with all of this and tries to bring America together comes out of the shadows, and it's a black president. I remembered that when Obama was running for president. Just those connections you make in life. But I think I was largely shaped by growing up in a third world country, surrounded by brown friends, family. Our maids were live-in caretakers for us, nannies, really. They were family for us. And then coming to the culture shock of Selma. Then going to high school in Hawaii, where I was back again among a diverse population. Diversity has always been an important factor in my life.
Okay. Fast forwarding, so I'm not going to college. Get me out of here. I'd rather go fight in a war. Where did you go to basic?
I went to basic at Fort Ord, California, Presidio of Monterey. Actually, if you're going to go into the service back then, this was a great way. I'm at the University of Minnesota, 63 below zero. If I sign up, they'll fly me back to Hawaii for a few weeks. I get this vacation in Hawaii. And then, you know, my basic training is in Southern California, Monterey, Fisherman's Wharf. It was probably the best basic training camp I could have picked. And in basic training, I did really well. I remember that during, and by the way, I had started playing guitar a couple years before going into the Army, mostly just folk music to play for Catholic folk mass. I sang with a Baptist youth group for a while. Didn't play very well. But when in basic training we faced the prospect of a couple of overnight marches, or there was a talent contest. And so I spoke to a couple of guys who played instruments and said, hey, why don't we form a band? It was kind of like Mickey Rooney, Junie Garland movies. Let's form a band. Why? Well, because we can get out of the march. Well, how are we going to do that? I said, leave it to me. So I went to the first sergeant and I said, or the drill instructor, drill sergeant, and said, how about if we do this talent contest, and if we win, we don't have to do the march. And if we lose, we'll just do it twice. And the other guys were like, dude, you can't be doing that. I said, hey, I got this. So we formed a band. We did Bye Bye Love and Your Cheating Heart, and we called the band Southern Comfort. I really couldn't play very well. I didn't know how to do harmonies, so they just said, hey, we know how to do that. You sing, we'll make it work. We won the talent contest.
Congratulations.
Did not have to do the march. Out of basic training, I received a presidential nomination for West Point's Military Academy Prep School at Fort Belvoir. And I decided that instead of going directly to the academy, I wanted to see what it was like to serve under people before I became somebody who led people in combat.
So when you initially joined, you joined to be an officer?
No, I joined just to enlist, but my testing, my performance in basic, I guess some of the leadership skills that I showed, showing the ability to get out of forced marches by joining a talent contest, I guess showed some leadership skill. They wanted me to accept a presidential nomination to the academy. I went through Intel school, and then I entered Fort Belvoir for the prep school, asked for delayed entry, and volunteered for Vietnam again. And I went to Vietnam in August of 1971 after Intel school and a few weeks at the Military Academy Prep School.
How long was Intel school?
Intel school was, I think it was about 3 months, and I was trained to be an intelligence analyst. Basically a glorified desk clerk whose job it would be to read through files and collect information and, results of interrogations and documents and things like that. And that's what I thought I was going to be assigned to do when I went to Vietnam.
You were about 19 at this time?
Yes, I would have been 19. I would have graduated from basic training, would have just turned 19 while I was in the intelligence school.
That's a lot of responsibility.
Well, that was just going to school. I'd been doing that for my whole life, so that was no big deal. The responsibility came when I went to Vietnam.
Okay. Can you tell me about that?
Well, some of this is going to be a little hard. I was not a combat grunt. I didn't hate Vietnamese people. I loved Asia. I loved Asian food. I loved the Asian climate. I loved being on the equator. I had joined the Army, had asked to go to Vietnam. Everybody in intel school that was around me, most of the people that were in basic training, most of the people that I was surrounded by when I arrived there were drafted. I was going to be a lifer. I remember my first day arriving in Bien Hoa in the 3rd Corps area that surrounded Saigon. It was the monsoons. Everything was covered in the red clay, old cots, just drenched in red clay. Taking quinine pills for malaria and having to run right to the outhouse. And I'd grown up in 3rd world countries and lived and spent time on family farms, but I'd never seen outhouses that were like 12 whole outhouses, and just everybody going in, not just the GIs, but then the mama sans, the women, the children, everybody was going into the outhouses. I remember the burning of the human waste and the stench, and that was just part of what you had to do when you were going through the processing center. And then I got my assignment to a little area attached to the largest base in Vietnam, which was Long Binh. And there was this little area that was attached to it called Plantation, and that's where the 3rd Corps headquarters was, which eventually became the 3rd Regional Assistance Command. And I was assigned to the 219th MI detachment. And when I got there, I was basically the youngest intel analyst there, and my first few months was basically working as a desk clerk, except for occasionally going out on guard duty. But I just felt really isolated. I worked really hard. I did my job, but I was isolated and alone. Most of the guys there were for recreation. They were bringing women onto the base. You could leave your meal card, and you could bring a woman on. You leave your meal card because everybody has to eat, so they know you'd bring her back because you'd want your meal card. If they weren't doing that, they were drinking, or they were shooting heroin or smoking heroin, or they were smoking pot. I was one of very few people that were not doing those things. And really most of the people who said they were not doing those things were lying, because almost everybody was doing that. And after about 6 months, I felt like people thought I was gay, which was not cool back then, that maybe I was a narc, and that I was just a goody two-shoes. And one day I just decided, you know what, I don't seem to be able to get close to anybody, and so I brought a woman on. I smoked some pot. I drank half a beer, and I don't really remember what happened that night. I do remember that she had been working on me for a while, trying to get me to bring her on. I would go to it was sort of a chicken wire cage processing center that these women would come on, and some would come in to do housework and laundry and that sort of thing. And some came on as prostitutes or lovers. And her name was Geehan, and this was my very first encounter with sex. And it was over before it started. And I felt kind of ashamed and stuff. And then I was surprised that 2 weeks later, I saw a report come across my desk. Geehan had been picked up by the National Police. My name was on a list. I guess because I was in an intel unit, they thought I could be a source of information. I don't know whether I was being set up for a kidnapping or what, but my name was on a list. So it turned out the first person that I ever had a romantic encounter with, if you want to call it romantic, turned out to be basically a Mata Hari, a Viet Cong Comma liaison cadre whose job it was to pump me for information or maybe set me up. The alcohol didn't take, didn't really like the feeling I had from being high, but I just wanted to get in with guys. And the junkies, the ones who were doing heroin, they'd smoke it, they get really stoned, they'd end up in a stupor, they'd go throw up somewhere, and that didn't look good. Alcohol, well, my father had gotten into social happy hour stuff, and growing up he'd become emotionally and physically detached but abusive. Didn't really want to go the alcohol route either. I really liked the music that was coming out of the stoners' rooms. And so I fell in with the stoners and the ones that were smoking pot. And the best pot, by the way, they got from the military police. And so we'd get together and smoke pot. And I fell in with that group. I really enjoyed the music. I didn't do a lot of it like the others were. In fact, my nickname by some of them was Dr. Gee because I was for Geehan. And it was because I was often caring for the people who were sick. And so they just sort of nicknamed me Dr. Gee. I did continue to smoke pot there. And you have to understand, I was in an intelligence unit. Everybody had secret, at least, top secret clearance, many of them. And these were the people who had background investigations. These were the people that were handling the most sensitive secrets. These were the people on whose lives were dependent on their being on the job. And they were all drunk, stoned, or worse.
All the time?
Most of them were on the time. I had a rule myself. I mean, they would smoke heroin in their cigarettes throughout the day, or have cans of beer hidden in places and stuff. I can honestly say that although you're technically on the job 24 hours, I never, ever was stoned when I was doing my job. I used it to sleep. I'd hear the arc light attacks, the B-52 strikes in the distance, and I'd have trouble sleeping, and then I'd hear stories about things that were happening in the field, and I had trouble sleeping with that.
What year is it?
71 at this time, and then early 72. And early 72 is when things changed for me. Our unit stood down. I had 7 months in country, and if you had 6 months in country or more, when the unit stood down, you'd be given a chance to go back home with the unit. Because Vietnamization was happening, American troops were winding down. And so the 219th MI detachment that I was assigned to returned back to the States. But because of the quality of the intel reports I had provided, they decided to offer me a 30-day leave if I volunteered to stay on. And I said, well, why wouldn't I want to go back with the unit? And they said, well, here's the deal. You can volunteer to stay and we'll give you a 30-day leave. Or the commanding general has said that he's going to declare you mission essential and you're going to be here as long as he's going to be here. So, of course, I volunteered to get the leave. I had begun doing in-the-field interrogations. I had begun flying around, picking up information, distributing information, going in and out of some risky areas. And I was beginning to pick up that there was something about to happen called a Nguyen Way campaign, a spring-summer offensive. And I put together that 1968 and 1972 were both presidential election years, both times when America was kind of divided. One major difference was that we had only 10% of the troops in 1972 that we had in 1968 of American troops. Then I started picking up indications of armored regiments moving down through Laos and Cambodia, just north of us, and artillery elements that we hadn't seen before. And I began putting together this picture of a major offensive that was going to happen. And I was told not to talk about it because Vietnamization was working, and our public posture was that was what we were going with. And so no, the enemy's been beaten, they can't do this. I said, but they're going to do this. At one point when I was giving a briefing, I remember the colonel who was the G2 making a comment to the commanding general staff, because at that point they began having me work in the top secret facility we called the Bunny Club. Because nobody knew what was going on there, so it was kind of our inside joke. We just said we're going into the Bunny Club. Even had a logo with a Playboy bunny, bunny Club on it. In a briefing this one day, the top intel officer told the general that we'd had no indications of anything happening. He announced this to the rest of the general staff. And I said, well, with all due respect, sir, that's not true. There's an armored regimental command post that's moving across here, and and as I was saying this, I could see the colonel just turning absolutely purple in a rage. And because I totally contradicted him. I basically said, the colonel's full of shit, General. I think something's about to happen. At the end of the briefing, I was told in no uncertain terms that I was probably going to be court-martialed for insubordination. A major intervened, and that night I thought, maybe there's something I can do. So that night I actually mapped out a whole plan of action to confirm what I thought was happening. And I wrote a report up on how it could be accomplished, what forces could be used for it. Looked up climate reports and everything in these areas to go explore these base areas to see if that was what was going to happen. I presented that the next day, and then I was ordered to the general's quarters. And I thought that was it. The general is General James D. Hollingsworth. He was a protege for Patton in Africa during World War II. And he had pearl-handled revolvers that Patton had given him that he kept in a desk drawer. And when I went there and was told to stand at attention, he reached into the desk drawer. I thought, oh my God, he's going to shoot me. he reached in, he pulled out an Army Commendation Medal, and he said that presentation and the way you did it was just awesome. And so he pinned the Army Commendation Medal on me. I was just floored. I ended up getting promoted out of it.
To?
Well, let's see, at that point I was an E3 out of Intel school. So I got promoted to, wait, I was an E2. Then I got promoted to E3. Within a few months of being there, I got promoted to E4 on that occasion. Then a couple months later, I got promoted to E5. So I had 3 essentially battlefield promotions. Just as the shit started to happen
That you predicted.
that I predicted, I could see it developing, was when my unit had stood down and I was sent, and I got my leave and I went home. And while I was home on leave, visiting my parents at Wright-Patterson Air Force Base, they'd been transferred from Hawaii to Wright-Patterson. My father's alcoholism had progressed, and I noticed that he was having DTs, and at one point I considered just beating him up because his fellow officers were covering for him. He was going to die at the rate he was going. And just as I thought about doing that, I was ordered back. The general was ordering me back because the offensive I predicted was starting to happen.
Was this before your leave was over, or you had to go
Yes,
leave?
before my leave was over. And understand, one day I was in Vietnam. The next day, because we're flying, the next day I'm in Dayton, Ohio. I'm here for like a couple of weeks. And then one day I'm in Dayton, Ohio. The next day I'm back in Vietnam. I didn't get a chance to act on what I was intending to do. About 3 or 4 days after I got back, the Red Cross came and said, your father's dying. He's in intensive care at Wright-Patterson Air Force Base. He's dying of cirrhosis and stuff. And they tell me you have to get back on the plane. So I'm in Vietnam. The next day I'm back in Dayton, Ohio. I'm visiting my dad, and he's saying, what time is it? What time is it? I said, why? Is there a betting line on when you're going to go? Because I'd like the inside line on that. We always joke through times like that. I gave him my Seiko watch and said, here, you'll always know you have time left as long as you've got this watch. Special security officers come and say, Mr. Geehan, you got to go back. You're needed back there now. So my father's dying, and I get called back. That day I'm in Dayton, Ohio. The next day I'm back in Vietnam. The shit has just opened up. Full enemy offensive, the Bin Laden campaign. Tanks are coming across the border. Tanks out of the jungles. 400 tanks are coming out of the jungles, from shipped down piece by piece from North Vietnam, taken apart, brought down the Ho Chi Minh Trail, a network of thousands of trails and roads and stuff, reassembled in rubber plantations north of us. And my father's dying. And I've gone through this, you know, back and forth and back. And there were times I'd fly out and I'd see fields of just hundreds of bodies. When I was around the area of Saigon, but north of there was a city called An Loc, and they overran half the city. And there were thousands of bodies around there, and there were just, you know, it was, you know, for me it was body counts on pieces of paper. And then I thought the people we were killing were all just enemy troops. And then there turned out to be kids that were welded into tanks so they couldn't get out, chained to machine guns, so they had to go along with their older counterparts in the North Vietnamese army. But worst was on June the 8th of 1972, a party of kids near the border were playing in a field, and probably a product of one of my targets, they were hit by napalm. And there's a famous a photo called Napalm Girl. And I was a journalist, and every year Pulitzers are announced, and this Pulitzer Prize winning photo is out. But when I saw that and realized that I was part of the machine that did that, I just changed. Sorry.
You're okay.
And it just changed me. But I kept doing my job, but I couldn't anymore say that, you know what, I'm just looking at paper, I'm just putting targets out, and I'm just killing people that are just trying to kill me. Well, I got 3 Bronze Stars during that time, not because I went out and killed people and did crazy shit, but because I was really good and effective at my job, and that I did go in and out of situations that were risky, but it was just my job. It wasn't, you know, that I did anything special.
I have a question.
Yeah.
Do you know how many lives you saved?
You know, if I did my job, maybe I saved some. But if I missed something, anytime a South Vietnamese troop was killed, anytime I heard people like Captain Harold Faldemeyer or Mark Zippo Smith, who I thought was killed, but he wasn't. I guess he was captured and escaped or got away somehow. I was 19, 20 years of age, and my job was to take more than we lost. And if I didn't do my job right, our people got killed. If people didn't believe me because I was only 19 or 20 years old and saying this shit was going to happen, then I wasn't being effective. And then I was told things like, I'd say, you know, I've got to go out here and tell these people this is about to happen. They'd say, no, you can't because of sources and methods. And I'd say, well, what the fuck good is sources and methods if you can't use it to tell somebody they're about to have shit come down on them? And so I developed I'd grown up with a real respect for authority and for the military and the government, and I just developed a real resentment toward a lot of stuff that was happening. And then I hadn't realized that shift from one day in Vietnam to Dayton, Dayton to Vietnam, Vietnam to Dayton, Dayton to Vietnam, and a family that kind of needed me as the oldest of 7 kids there. I was, you know, and my mom could have needed me, and then I had people here that needed me, and it just split. I didn't realize it then because I packed it all away. I just did my job. A desk clerk job. So then peace was declared. We did manage to hold them off. They didn't get into Saigon like they did in '68. And we did that with 10% of the American soldiers in an advisory capacity. And there were like twice as many NBA regulars coming down on us. So as part of that team, yeah, we did a really good job. We had technology on our side, but they had heart. Oh my God, they had heart. And that's something that nobody else respected, but because I knew how industrious Asian people were, and the Vietnamese people, I mean, I ate with them. I respected them. I loved Vietnam, but for that war thing, so we were effective at holding them at An They didn't get within 20 miles of Saigon. Then peace was declared, and I was part of the folks that were coordinating the withdrawal. The North Vietnamese were pulling back to agreed upon lines, and peace broke out. I came back in March. I got there in August of '71. I returned home as one of the last planes out of combat soldiers in March of '73 to Fort Bragg. And for the next 2 years, I didn't do anything that was addictive, but damn, I did a lot of drugs recreationally. I still tell people of a night, 4 of us were on our way to a Blue Oyster Cult concert, and I was driving my little Renault with my elbows while rolling a joint and tripping on acid. You know, it's more a miracle that I survived the couple of years after Vietnam than that I survived Vietnam. I didn't realize that at that point I was an action junkie. I just needed the risk. I needed the fear. I needed the excitement. Or maybe I was just trying to kill myself because I felt so much rage, so much guilt. And my father survived, by the way. He recovered. He became a wonderful man. 40 years later, back in 2011, I went to visit him at the VA where he was finally dying. And I was the last one to see him before he died that night. And I went to put a shirt on so he could go get some x-rays. And I went over to pick up a watch. And I looked at it and I said, "Where'd you get this watch?" And he said, "I got it 40 years ago. When you told me I'd have time on my hands as long as I had it. I said, why don't you take it?" I said, "Really?" He said, "Yeah." And he died that night. And I was the last one to see him. That was cool. Over the years, I realized I had some pain issues. I'd taken a couple falls in Vietnam. One time we landed a helicopter in the middle of this, turned out to be a schoolyard, and these kids came running out. And I went to jump out of the helicopter to get them away. I was afraid the blades would come down and like just take them all out. And I tripped on a strut and I injured my back. I never reported it to anybody. I mean, there's a hell of a lot more shit going on than report to somebody that you hurt your back getting out of the helicopter. But I still suffer from some of the pain from that. I didn't have the time for the pain back then. But it's more the emotional pain that stayed with me. I discovered years later that I had physically left Vietnam, but I had never really mentally left Vietnam. You know, it's something to realize that probably the greatest thing you ever accomplished was done when you were 19 and 20 years old, and everything's downhill after that.
When did you get out of the military?
I got out in December of '73, and I'd been a unit drug counselor, race relations counselor. At Fort Bragg, there was a Chicano club, there was a black club, and there was a white club for the enlisted. And woe be unto the Chicano that walked into the black club, or the black guy that walked into the white club, or the white guy that walked into either of the other two clubs. And so I trained to be a race relations counselor, the kind of guy who would get called out when a riot broke out in one of those clubs in the middle of the night to come sort it out. And also to help do what was then called family crisis intervention, but what we were really dealing with was PTSD and the effects on the families. And then drug and alcohol counseling, although the neatest thing to me about being a drug and alcohol counselor was the fact that during recess we all went into the latrine and snorted coke. Because if you became a drug and alcohol counselor, you'd find out who had the shit and you could get it when you wanted to. But I actually did it because my dad had been an alcoholic, and I'd seen the guys that were the junkies and everything, and it was really about that. I never really thought about snorting a little bit of coke or smoking a little bit of pot as being serious, or even tripping. It was just fun. But eventually one day somebody offered me some acid, and I said, you know what? I just realized I stopped doing that 30 years ago. And so one day, for some reason, I just stopped doing that stuff. What I was on in the intervening years was because of physical pain that I had, and the emotional pain that caught up to me was morphine, methadone, Percocet, Ambien, clonazepam, lorazepam, tizanidine, baclofen, 2 or 3 favorite antidepressants of my current psychiatric trainees at the VA. These are all VA prescribed medications, and for 20 years I was like numb. Not always physically, but I was numb mentally. Ambien, I couldn't remember what I'd done the last 2 days. I'd go into rages from the physical pain, and then the emotional pain and the physical pain, they'd feed on each other. I couldn't have intimate relationships. I just like missed 20 years, even though I was accomplishing great things. I was a PR guy. I was a counselor and educator at Planned Parenthood. After getting a degree in counseling and education and human sexuality at Wright State, I designed my own degree. Kept me in school because it was a subject I could stay interested in. And they let me design my own degree because it didn't fit into the other programs. And so I worked for a few years at Planned Parenthood, and then I left and formed my own business doing public relations consulting for good causes. And then I got onto all those medications the VA had me on. A few years ago, I was in a serious car accident, and it could have increased all of those. But I asked the VA, is there not something else I could be doing? And they'd say, you just go home and you take the drugs and you'd be happy you're getting them. You watch your old John Wayne movies and stuff, and we'll take care of you. We'll give you a check for the rest of your life and all that. And I said, you know what? I don't think that's good enough. So I stopped doing all of that crap. I went and bought a guitar. I hadn't played guitar for over 40 years since I went to Vietnam. And I began playing guitar to focus myself again, to distract myself from the pain. I began writing songs when the kids asked me about doing that. I began writing songs about the robot team. And there was a way for me to express feelings that I hadn't been able to express for years. And I found salvation in volunteering. And so I volunteered with a food bank, I volunteered with a children's art school, I volunteered with a robotics team, I volunteered with a rehab center, adult daycare center. Even though I haven't been to church in like 40 years, I taught music in a church to at-risk kids this past summer. So I've been teaching others how to get past emotional and physical pain the way that I have. And that's been really a rewarding thing for me. And what I get back from people is that they really like the songs that I write about PTSD, about veteran suicide, but I also write songs about joy, about happiness, about love. One song says it all that I wrote that's basically saying I'm in love with you is much easier to sing. I was never really able to say the kinds of things that make intimate connections, but in music and in songwriting, I found ways to express those feelings, to connect to those feelings. And it is a song about PTSD and about veteran suicide that I get the most positive feedback from, and it's a song in which 22 veterans a day commit suicide. I thought about it. And the way I came up with the song, I tried to write one for 3 years, and I went to a music therapy club who'd read an article about me and how I use music and volunteering to help myself and to help others. And they said, so how do you not be one of those 22 guys a day? And I said, well, you know, I've been trying to write a song about that for 3 years and I can't come up with it. What do you think would help? And they'd say, well, the VA. Accept Jesus Christ as your Lord and Savior. Thanking them for their service, the love of friends and family. I said, you know what? Let me write a song about that, using what you just told me. And so I came up with the song Loaded Gun. And want to hear it now?
Yes, please.
Okay.
Yes, please.
Like I said, it took 3 years to write. I have a hard time when I sing this a lot because it's got kind of a good connection, but this is a guy who's sitting alone in a car with a loaded gun, and he's been having a conversation with that gun, and he's calling his wife, telling her that, leaving her a voicemail because she's not there, and he's telling her that he's not going to be coming home tonight. Hello, dear, are you there? I hope you know I care. Though I'm not the man I was before that war. 2 tours in desert heat, my body's parched, my soul's depleted. My heart's as hard as body armor that I wore. Well, the battlefield may be gone, but in my mind war lingers on. The way back to myself's not in my sights. A loaded gun in my car, and I've been talking things over, dear, and I don't think that I'm coming home tonight. I went to the VA just to see what they would say. They said, we'll see you in a couple months, couple weeks if we get a cancellation. There must be lots of ways to send a vet along a better way, but they didn't have the staff, time, or resources I needed. They said they had lots of drugs to sweep my problems under rugs. They'd numb my mind and I would have less fright. A loaded gun in my car, and I've been talking things over, dear, and I don't think I'm coming home tonight. I went to the church we know. I saw old Father Joe. He said, all of your sins will be forgiven. He just couldn't know how far that I will go to try to make my guilt and anger end. He said all would be all right and I could end my plight. All I had to do was accept Jesus Christ's light. Loaded gun in my car, and I've been talking things over, dear, and I don't think that I'm coming home tonight. You know, there were some days I'd go out on my way. Someone would stop and ask me, what'd you do in that war? I always said, I just did my job. They'd say, thanks for your service, Bob. Now we appreciate you more. But they couldn't know the holes that were shot into my soul. What I saw and did, I just can't justify. loaded gun in my car, and I've been talking things over, dear, and I don't think that I'm coming home tonight. They couldn't know the holes that were shot into my soul. What I saw and did, I just can't justify. A loaded gun in my car, and I've been talking things over, dear. Don't think I'm coming home tonight. Hello, is that you, dear? Now it sounds like we're both shedding tears. You say you want me back with you all right tonight. You say it's lonely in our bed, that you and the children have said you'll stick with me, though it means more sacrifice. You say I was there when you needed me, and now it's only right. You'll all be there to help me make it through this awful night. So I've unloaded the gun and I've started the car and I've thought things over. I'll be home soon safely, dear, with all of you tonight.
That was beautiful.
Thank you.
Thank you.
I actually play it better and sing it better when I am not so emotionally involved, but actually I get a little emotionally involved every time I do it. I'm still trying to find peace. This shirt is the Dayton International Peace Museum. It was established after the Dayton Peace Accords, after the war in Bosnia. And I am a senior corps, retired seniors volunteer program, volunteer RSVP. It's a federal program like Teacher Corps, Peace Corps, and I take gigs volunteering. And this may turn out to be the most rewarding thing that I've done, because they're about peace. They're not just about war and peace issues. They're about family violence, gun violence, civil rights, social justice, human rights, the environment, competition over scarcity for food, water, fuel, just the things that cause conflict, ways to resolve and mediate conflict. And the volunteering, putting something of myself out there, not just sitting home collecting a VA check and a Social Security check, but actually doing something, trying to make a positive investment forward, is not just a way of repaying the sins of the past, but it's a way of maybe helping others avoid committing the same mistakes. The music is a way that I express those emotions, the way I share those feelings, the way I deal with emotional pain, the way I express it, the way I escape the physical pain. The volunteering is something that I do just to feel good about myself. And that's how I think I have found my own personal redemption. Music is the vehicle that gets me in, but the hard work, the working with people, developing relationships, expressing my feelings with others, that's something I didn't have for over 30 years, almost 40 years after Vietnam. And I missed an awful lot during those years. I'm hoping that I can prevent others from missing the same things and try to find myself in doing that. And so that's what the music is for me, and that's what volunteering does for me. As far as why we have PTSD, Vietnam veterans were the first to, it was called cowardice, yellow fever, shell shock in previous wars. The reason it was so noticeable in Vietnam was this whole idea that when we went, it was, you'd leave here, the next day you're in the shit. You're in the shit, then the next day you're back with your family. And that had never happened before. Before, in the Civil War or Revolutionary War, you'd walk for weeks to battle, and then you'd have a chance to process it coming back. Or in the World War I, World War II, you'd be going over in ships, Korea, and same thing. You'd have a chance to process this stuff. It's like going down too fast and too deep. And if you come up faster than the bubbles in the water, you get the bends. You have to be put in a decompression chamber, taken back down there and slowly brought back. Those wars where we walked to them or we went over in ships, we had a chance to process stuff before and after. Plus, you went as a unit from your hometown together, and you came back to your hometown together often, unless you were wounded. And in Vietnam, you came from all over the country, and you were thrown together into basic and then into a unit, and then you were thrown over there in 24 hours, and then you stayed there for 1 year, not till the end of the war, till you won it or lost it, but all you had to do is live for 365 days, and then you're back. That had never happened before, and that's when we noticed this extreme change that began, that more PTSD was happening. And what I feel badly for the soldiers now, we were treated very badly when we came back, but these guys are going into 5, 6, 7 deployments. We just had to go 1 year. Make it out, you come back. These guys are going into multiple deployments, into dangerous assignments and stuff. How they deal with it, I don't know. One of the things that I did do that got me interested in volunteering that I'm most proud of was that during Operation Desert Storm, when I saw troops going over the first war after Vietnam, I said, I don't want to have happen to them what happened to us. And so I formed an organization called Operation Support, and I worked with the Pentagon to set up 2 any service member addresses where people could send letters of support, postcards. We collected, inventoried, and shipped 250 tons of care packages to them, recreational items, Skin So Soft, Avon Skin So Soft that would kill sand fleas, Tabasco sauce to deal with the heat, footballs, baseballs, badminton sets, personal care items, toilet paper, real toilet paper. And then we set up a toll-free number to divert calls from well-wishers calling into the Army, Navy, Air Force phone lines that were reserved for family members. So in doing this, we got the country to come together and support the troops, because it wasn't whether you were for or against the war, it's that they were instruments of a foreign policy devised by politicians that we as a country elected, and so they were our responsibility, however you felt about it. And the story that most makes me happy that I did that was that we didn't try to raise money, but we were given money. And just to let you know the horrors of war and how they affect people who aren't even in it, a woman had gotten called to tell her that her son had died. His son had been hit and he was killed. Everybody in the crew was killed. And it hit her very hard. She contacted us to ask if she could get some financial assistance to go meet the body when it came back. We said, yeah. A couple days later, she got a call, and it was her son, who she'd just been told was killed. Turned out he was just wounded. There was a mix-up in identification or something. And he said, oh, I just got a scratch in the head, as it turns out. And she was elated. She says, oh, we don't need that anymore. And I said, I'm really happy for you. Until a couple days later, he had volunteered to go back out on another mission, and he was killed in that mission. She got a call, another call within like 10 days that her son was killed again. And this time it was for real. But the outpouring of support that we had gotten for Operation Support enabled her to take her family, meet them, relocate them. You know, I may not have been able to save as many lives as I wanted to when I was in Vietnam. I may have caused a lot of hardship and a lot of suffering when I was there. But to have eased some of the burden on the troops that were coming back and who were there in that deployment, and to see it continuing, to have been able to actually help a family that had suffered themselves such horrible emotional injury, that was really cool. So that's probably when my volunteering really started, and it's just been fully realized now in the things that I do. But anyway, I know I went on there, but these are the things that I take out of my experience.
Let me say that Operation Support was amazing to me, and I was a 4th grader when it happened.
Really?
And we got to help also. Didn't understand war, didn't understand all of those things, but I knew what it meant to do support, be supportive, and to help, and at that age. So thank you for that program, because it made a difference in my life and who I've become. So I appreciate that very much.
Well, that's cool. Just one little anecdote. When they found out that local channel 2, WDTN TV here, was doing a story on how we were doing this, Good Morning America got the feed, and they said, oh, we got to have this guy on Good Morning America. And that's when it really mushroomed, and we set up a P.O. Box 1 in Yellow Springs, Ohio to get them, but it's not functional, don't write to that anymore. So when they put you up in Good Morning America, they fly you up, they put you into like a $500 a night hotel, and they fly you up first class, they dump you back coach. So just want to let you know, it's not a totally awesome first class ride all the way, but that was so neat to just see. You know, it was like a pebble in a brook that had a rippling effect. And we got letters from people I hadn't heard from in years and stuff. He said, I saw you on TV and Good Morning America and do this. But sometimes just a little idea, a conversation that took place between me and the wife of another veteran, and me remembering what it was like to get care packages from home and letters from home. And geez, wouldn't it be great if the whole country would support these people? And to know that it reached you.
In California.
In California, yeah. So that's really awesome.
Okay. Are you a part of any other veterans organizations?
Boy, you know, it's the hardest thing. I never really feel comfortable in them. You know, you go to the American Legion, the VFW clubs and things like that, they're like gambling in the back with slot machines or poker machines, or they're smoking cigarettes, or I don't drink, I don't smoke, I don't gamble. I don't really normally feel like I fit in so much with veterans organizations. I don't really like telling war stories. I brought a half-size replica of the Vietnam Wall into Dayton. Probably 250,000 people came to see it at a cemetery south of Dayton. It was a perfect setting for it. We got some people from an engineering organization at Wright Pat to come put it up for us and stuff. And you know, it was there for 4 days. I brought it in, I set it up, I organized taking it down. He did all the publicity, the media for it. I coordinated all the volunteers for it. I was in a tent 40 feet from it. I never went up to the wall. I've never been to the real one. I brought one in for everybody else. But
You have not been to the real one?
no. I couldn't even go to the half-size one that I brought in. I still live with the war. I still live with the guilt of the horrors I rained down. People don't think of napalm as having been the largest use of weapons of mass destruction by any force in history, but it was.
I hear you tell me that, and what I hear or what I think of is how many American troops that you saved with being smarter than your colonel. So I appreciate that, okay? I understand that what you face is very difficult as being a combat veteran myself, but I appreciate that, okay? Is there anything that you feel that we haven't discussed that you would like to be added to this interview?
Maybe one thing, and that's that some people think that it's kind of abnormal. I've even been accused by people who know me, or questioned at least, why you take such an interest in my granddaughter? Why you want to do this with kids all the time? I mean, I've worked with suspected child abuse networks. I've worked with victims of sexual abuse. I've worked with teenagers in Planned Parenthood. I've worked with kids in juvenile detention centers. I've taught music to a group of kids ages 2 to 12 at the same time. I've worked with high school robotics kids. I love working with kids. It's weird to me that people think that's weird, but especially knowing why I do it. And that's that kids are our hope for peace. And kids are also people that I affected very badly. I know that that little 9-year-old girl, Kim Fook was her name, is her name, because she's like in her 50s now. She's had over 40 skin grafts and surgeries. She comes around and talks. She's been through Dayton a few times. You know, just like I've never been able to go to the wall, I've never been able to go see her. I connect with my guilt from the past, with my anger that we subject children to things like this, by trying to connect with children. I have 6 brothers and sisters. They all have children. I don't. I don't know why, but I just never felt like I was worthy to have kids after that. But I like working with kids. I like helping kids. I like teaching kids. I like learning from kids. When I did the summer camp for 2 to 12 years olds of almost all black kids, and I thought, oh, I'll go in with the Supremes and the Four Tops. They're like, who? And so I spent about 4 weeks just teaching them different instruments and just playing music and things. But I thought, you know, why don't you kids teach me what you like? And so they began teaching me Rihanna, and it was on Boomerang by someone named Cece somebody, I think. And these kids are like hopping around, like you turn the Boomerang on and it's like somebody just all of a sudden like pumped methamphetamine into them, and they're like dancing all these weird moves I've never seen before, but they're all doing the same ones, and it's just awesome. And just to crystallize a beautiful moment, so we had 8 weeks together of me teaching them and them teaching me, and at the end of it, the sheriff's department, we had a bonfire, and the sheriff's department set up a stage with microphones. I didn't know that was going to be there, but I showed up for the last night to say goodbye to them, and I got up, I wrote a song about it, and I got up and sang it for them, and then the kids got together and we had them sing Shine Like a Diamond by Rihanna, and about self-esteem, and we had practiced that. And then I formed them into 2 dancing line, boys and girls, starting at the end and coming through and dancing, showing their moves, and their parents and their grandparents are going like, we used to do that when we were young. And they're doing this to Boomerang, and it was just so neat, you know, to see that I can make a positive difference in kids' lives now. It doesn't make up for it, but it's a new start.
What message would you like to leave for future generations that will view or hear this interview?
No matter how much guilt, no matter how much anger, no matter how much injury you've caused, and no matter how much injury you've incurred, I think each of us can find our own way to rise above it, to find a way to stand back up when you've been knocked down, and to try to help others learn a positive lesson from that. And while, you know, a lot of suffering was shaped in the cauldron of a war, there is a lot of good and a lot of positive that came out of my experience in it. It doesn't remove my guilt and my anger. It does give me a way to process it, and it does give me a way to convert it into something good.
Thank you so much for your time here today.
Okay.
This concludes the interview with Dennis Geehan at Wright State University. Thank you.
Thank you. Oh, okay. Because I can do that too. You can roll it, you can smoke it, you can put it in your pipe or bong and toke it, you can vape it, you can shake it right in your brownie mix and bake it. Well, the devil says it's hell. Better angels know they made it swell. Devil weed. You can do it to feel alright. And chemotherapy mucks up your appetite if your dreams give you terrible frights. It might help you make it through the night. Well, the devil says it's hell. Better angels know they made it swell. Devil weed. Well, you could try some pot. For many adults it can be hot, but for kids it is definitely not. Well, the devil says it's hell. Better angels know they made it swell. Devil weed. It won't hurt you, won't desert you. Hell, it won't even make a pervert of you. You can bogart it, but it's much more fun to share it. In fact, you can share it with me. Well, the devil says it's hell. Better angels know they made it swell. Devil weed. The devil made me write that song.
Did you write it yourself?
Yes.
That's hilarious. So good.
It's a song called Freight Train. Freight train, run so fast. Well, I was also playing. This is a song called Running Away From Myself. So I write just little tunes and things, but I sometimes make connections. So like I take a song like a 13th century song like Greensleeves. It's about a guy that falls in love with a hooker. Back then in England, you had to wear a green jacket if you were a prostitute. And this guy falls in love with this prostitute. And then she's like, dude, I only do this for money. It's not about emotional content. So she takes off and moves to another city. So he thinks, alas, my love, you do me wrong to cast me out disdainfully. Green sleeves is my heart's desire. Green sleeves is my... whatever, I can't remember all the words to it. But I made the connection that it's actually, because the chords were like, wait a minute, I know this from somewhere, and it turns out it was. As I walk along, I wonder what went wrong with our love, a love that was so strong. And as I still walk on, I think of a love we had together while our hearts were young. I'm walking in the rain, tears are falling and I feel the pain, wishing you were here by me to end this misery. And I wonder, well, I wonder why, well, why she ran away, and I wonder where she will stay, my little runaway. So I just brought a 13th century song together with a 20th century rock song. And it turns out they were about the same thing, had the exact same chord progression. So I just kind of sometimes make connections between songs like that. When I play mostly now just feeling in the moment. I don't play a song, I hardly ever play a song the same way twice, which unnerves people that I play with because they never know which Dennis is gonna. Wait a minute, are you gonna play Green Sleeves like as a 13th century classical guitar piece, or is it gonna be a hip hop song?